Welcome to the Nejia Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, Qigong, and meditation. This week we continue our discussion from Bob Yu's article in the Journal of Asian Martial Arts, where he discusses his training with Xiang. In this episode, he gets into the sort of specifics of training the five elements, both the theory and the movement. So we discuss that a little bit. And in the Patreon episode, we finally get to the big supposed fight between Hung Zihan and Sweet Potato. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and take care of yourselves.
Today we're going to return to our discussion of the famed Chinese martial arts master Hung Xiang, and drawing on the article Hung Xiang and Five Fists, Xingyi Boxing in Old Taipei by Robert Yu. It was published in Journal of Asian Martial Arts back in 2002. And Bob Yu's a student of Master Hong's from that 70s era that we've been talking about, and he offers quite a few insights into what the training was like back in the good old days. So he was describing what it was like training with Master Hong, and now he gets into more of the technical details of training the five elements of Xingyi, which are the most fundamental forms. So he says, the Xingyi form that I was doing in the hallway of Hong's office some 32 years ago is called the Wu Xing. It is the most important form in the Xingyi style. Wu Xing means five elements, represented by metal, water, wood, fire, and earth. So he describes that these five elements appear in many places in the Chinese world. It's sort of part of Chinese cosmology. It's found in art and literature and all sorts of medicine and cooking. Everywhere includes the five elements if you want to use that lens. So he says it represents phases that energy moves through. Energy changes, it emerges, grows, and expands. It also diminishes, ebbs, and contracts. This energy can be solid as a rock or as wispy as a cloud. When energy moves and reaches its zenith, it is closer to its demise. It transcends as it begins to rise or begins to fade. The five elements are a description of energy as it changes and evolves, and these transitions are represented by the symbols metal, water, fire, wood, and earth. And this is something we've been talking about a whole bunch, especially on the Patreon. We were talking about Baihua's book about this sort of idea of yin and yang at the basis of things growing and growing to a certain point, and then naturally fading and falling and becoming back to nothing, then growing back up again, and like this never-ending cyclical nature that Chinese cosmology, Taoist philosophy always relies on. So the five elements at its most basic level is sort of breaking up from yin and yang into something more complex and more specific to give you the different ways in which, or more detailed look at how things grow and then diminish over time in their natural sequence, basically.
Yeah, I mean the basic process of Wu Ji to Tai Chi to Wu Xing, right? Like you get that refinement from the nothing ball of goo to splits to yin and yang, right? It keeps refining itself. Eventually it gets to the five elements, and if you keep going it turns into the 8 trigrams. It's that, this is just basically the Taoist view of the world from 1,000 years ago, right? So the
like I says, it's not. Yeah, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say the martial arts adapted that model to movement so that it was easy to remember for people who understood that model.
Right. I think what he says that's kind of key is that it's not static. So like when you're learning Xingyi, there's metal element, and it's like this thing that you do. But the way he says is metal, as it becomes closer to its maximum and then naturally flows into water, it's like metal is never just one thing. It's never just a solid. In none of these, in other words, when someone says, I do fire fist to block somebody, it doesn't mean I just stand there in one final position. There's the beginning of the fire, there's the growing of the fire, there's the unleashing of the fire, then there's this cooling down of the fire, diminishing of the fire and then that moving into Earth. So
Yeah,
there's
like
like
there's a
it's not
multifaceted.
static, you know. Yeah.
Well, and it's this multi-layer, all of these elements have different qualities. So like you said, there's multiple pieces of each element and those become the techniques, right? So you have different parts of water act differently.
Right.
You got a wave, you got a whirlpool, you got all these different ways that
Right. You've
water
got a
can.
placid water or a tidal wave.
Right.
There's
So
Yeah,
you're
so it's a good way to think of things rather than like a straight punch. A straight punch is a straight punch. But in Xingyi, you've got these five elements that are the basis, and they're very transmutable. And you got to keep remembering that there's so much more to each one than the final position that's in a picture in a book. There's all the
right.
different pieces that come before and after, and there's a flow to it that it's hard to like completely nail down because I guess it's not static. You can never nail it down. That's the whole point. So Bob carries on by saying Xingyi literally embodies the idea of energy change into its movements. Training body movements to use internal energy results in a different quality of motion than motion that does not train in this way. Movement that uses internal energy has more power than motion that uses simple force. In fighting, the force typically used is generated by the combination of speed and muscle mass. So it follows that faster speed and larger muscles will result in greater impact. However, in Xingyi training, the use of force is just the first step to understanding how to develop and use one's power. Real power comes from learning to use one's energy. So there's that internal idea of how chi or energy is a factor above and beyond the speed and weight, which he admits is part of it. Like, yeah, you definitely bigger and faster is not bad. Those are great things to have, but there's more to it than that. There's a different quality he describes that where you're incorporating this energy change into the movement that's not just, throwing a cannonball at the wall harder.
Yeah, and there's a piece about your physical mass, size, all that you can't do. I mean, you can do a little bit about it, but like you can never make yourself taller or shorter or like make your arms longer, that kind of thing. So that you have limitations to your physical strength essentially,
Right.
where
Oh, well, yeah.
your internal strength essentially is not limitless, but it's much more um based on or much less based on size and strength, external
It's not what
strength.
you're born with. It's something
Yeah.
that you train,
It's
basically.
this thing yeah, exactly. It's this thing you can train that's not just about being bigger and faster. It's about having these five qualities, these internal energies, right? And it's kind of again, this is the whole ethos of, you go Jing Qi Shin, right? That you start by learning the Xingyi by moving the body and doing the forms, and that develops that first level of structure and body and strength and all of that. And you keep doing it, and then the chi part starts to emerge. And that's what he's talking about here is when you do those movements long enough, things, start to happen. It's like that's just kind of how the
They're
body,
designed that way, yeah.
yeah.
So he's got four different factors that are involved in this. So in Xingyi, the forms are exercises that are designed to develop this intrinsic or internal energy. To develop internal energy, one must be trained to do four different things. A, align the spine in a variety of positions. B, develop flexibility to increase the body's potential. C, engage the waist or qua. And D, cultivate internal energy, qi, and use this energy with the conscious body movement to create fa jing. These are the qualities of internal energy. All of these actions must come together to create energy, and when this energy is combined with force, it maximizes one's fighting intention. The student is taught to initiate action with a combination of force and energy. Force is thought of as a square, linear, and straight, while energy is visualized as round, circular, and wavy. Pure energy is utilized instinctively, as when a tiger pounces on a deer. So each of these things are important. I think he's right. So he starts with talking about aligning the spine in a variety of positions that are beneficial to your um, into to releasing your power. So again, that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with size and strength. It's about if you can take a postural alignment that puts you at a slight advantage, that can make a big difference.
Yep. That's why the first thing you learn is standing and aligning your spine.
Mm,
Right. I mean,
that's Santi kind of training. And so do you think this is moving the spine independent of like taking a step to one side or the other or shifting an angle?
the central piece is that it's connected. I
Mm,
think, I mean, it's aligned, that you're not leaning forward or leaning back or, leaning to one side. So you can um, be straight and be at an angle, right? And then you can be at an angle and make a wave to go straight again. Sort of the transitions are optional, right? You can be, but like if you're going from a leaning forward position, you want your spine straight at an angle to being vertical, right? That's kind of like how you do a push or something or a punch, right? You want to end straight. You don't want to end with your head leaning back or your chest sticking out or anything
right.
like that, right? So it's
And he says too, the second one is to develop flexibility. That makes me think about, say, opening the energy gates where you get those swings and sort of looseness in your body. So it creates whipping power when you turn that spine, you can swing an arm becomes a
I
lot
think that's more
stronger.
the next one. That's the waist one.
Mm,
This one I think is more about stretching.
mm,
I think this is more about having that ability to um, release your body as you extend, right? Because that's a big part of um, the progression. Basically, goes you got to get your body straight, then you have to get all that tension in your body to release, in the posture, and that's kind of that internal stretch.
they'll say to
And
open from the inside out kind of feeling.
yeah, and then the next one is to get the thing you were talking about with the waist, and that's
Mm,
where you're turning and has that connection. But if it doesn't have that stretch to it, it
mm,
kind of ends up being floppy.
that makes sense. And then you can use that waist to turn around the central core, which causes that centripetal force kind of effect where your limbs whip out.
Yeah, and that's if the thing Marcus talked about.
Oh yeah, the
Remember
Swisha. Yeah,
the swings being sort of the core principle, right? And then you kind of put the different weapons on top of it.
pretty much. And then D is to cultivate chi and use this energy with conscious body movement. Now, that's a
Right.
little
Well,
more
that's
mysterious.
interesting because the others are all physical
Mm,
things, and this one is not a physical thing. This is about so the way my because of my training, I think of it as, oh, this is where he's talking about doing something like, maybe not exactly, but something like dissolving, where your mind is moving through your body to create that sense of awareness, which leads you into being able to feel your chi. So
he has a note at the bottom that says, Fa Jing is the action that occurs when one's internal energy, qi, is combined with force, li.
sure.
So that's you've still got the li of the of reaching out and punching, but then you add that qi to that and they put them together to make Fa Jing.
That's part of it. I think there's more to it than that, just that. But the thing he's talking about is you got to have power and you got to have energy, right? In order to use it as a martial art. Like if you're just doing it for healing, for example, you don't need to have the power part. You just do it with the chi part. I one of the best healers I knew was not the strongest guy in the world. He was quite frail in some ways, but he could move chi in a way that was very powerful, but it
Mm.
wasn't um it was more through his chi moving your chi, not him moving your physical body.
He wasn't combining it with li, in other
So he
words.
wasn't using, yeah, he wasn't using um fa jing, right? He was using fa chi. He was releasing his chi, not releasing his power.
Hmm,
Those are slightly different things, but
definitely. And he describes it as he describes utilizing energy as a tiger pouncing on the deer. There's this intuitive, it's like tigers don't lift weights and skip jump rope to be faster. Like they use their natural inbuilt, they're constantly exercising all day so that there's an intrinsic, instinctive, natural energy that can create tremendous power probably within all of us. But as people, you've got to kind of consciously tap into it or find a way to open up and release that sort of inner power that we all have. And I think that's one of the things that's attractive about internal martial arts is the idea of opening up something that's already in there that's kind of locked up and trapped and stuck and find a way to release that and through that create power.
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I mean, I there's something deep inside of all of us in a sense that's sort of um connected to this thing. This is what the Taoists called the Tao, right? So that energy, that internal stillness, whatever, these guys figured out that if you can connect to that while you're fighting, you get less of the bad, you get one, you're better at fighting, but you also don't get the side effects of like your mental state going wonky and things like that. So, it takes longer. You got to
Right,
train longer because it's not just about learning to move and to fight. It's about adding this other element to it. But, um, that was kind of the whole thing these guys were into back then was how do they improve? Because it's like, it was the arms race thing, it was like, how do you
right.
improve your battlefield, your score on the battlefield? Well,
Right. If you're
you
both
only
already two equal armies, how do you get an edge?
right, and there was only so far technology could take you, right? Like once you had bigger, stronger swords or whatever,
Right,
like that was a
right,
limit, right? So then it became about, well, how do you make your body so that when you're engaged in combat, you have a slight edge mentally or physically over the other guys? And hence that's what, that martial arts were
that
born
led
from.
to this internal
You
martial
know,
arts revolution of pretty much the turn of the century, the late 1800s, and then
when you look at the stuff that you're doing in Negong, which was around way before the martial arts stuff, they had a lot of these principles in it, but it was more about moving your energy to make your body healthy. It wasn't about doing it to be able to, knock out King Kong, as it were. But that became a
right,
thing, and they figured out, hey, this is a great way to do both, right? You can stay healthy and you can, fight.
right. You can train in such a way as you don't screw yourself up as much. I mean, and he speaks to that a little bit by saying the genius of Xingyi is in its synthesis of the five elements. The adaptation of the five elements theory of energy change to body movement has made Xingyi famous among Chinese who would otherwise have had little interest in the martial arts. And that's that distinction that you're talking about of different schools that have different interests and different directions. This five element side of it is inspiring and interesting, and I think that maybe that's again that part of that thing that attracts people to internal martial arts who are of a more philosophical bent.
Absolutely. I think there's a huge part of it that is like people intellectually like that,
Yeah,
or the way it's organized,
it
right?
keeps it interesting, you
And
know?
then, yeah, and the other side of it is when you're teaching a martial art, if you want it to be able to teach it to someone else, you need to have
Mm.
it organized in a certain way.
Hmm.
I won't name names, but there are a lot of really good martial artists. But when they do things, it's different, slightly different every time. And it's more based on their ability to just feel what's happening. And the forms are kind of loose in terms of what they are. So it's not consistent and it's hard to follow them because they're not doing exactly the same thing over and
Hmm.
over, even though the, you know,
Right.
the
It's
the
yeah.
feeling is the same, right?
It's relying on their talent and experience more than the system they're using, so to speak.
Exactly. They're able to just do things in the moment and it's very spontaneous, right?
But it's hard to
Which is
teach necessarily.
which is the highest level of all martial arts, but that's hard to teach people because all they can do is try to mimic you, right? There isn't really much more that you can do. You can get hit and you can feel it and you can try to mimic it, but there isn't like a way to kind of get it in your system that's intellectual, right? When you have a form, especially if that form is based on a principle that you're familiar with, it's easier to remember things and to put things in context. So, I don't know how much of that translates to the modern age with most Westerners, but, a couple hundred years ago in Asia, those type of metaphors meant something to people.
All right, so he gets down into the action of the five elements. The five elements, the five elements form activates the five energies by practicing the movements and postures of the five fists. The type of energy gathered for each of the five fists is characterized by these descriptive words. So the first one is metal fist, a splitting, cleaving action like an axe. The second one is water fist, a drilling, boring action like a waterfall. Third one is wood fist, a crushing, smashing action like a battering ram. Number 4, fire fist, a pounding, bursting action like a ball shot out of a cannon. And earth fist, crossing fists with a swirling, corkscrew-like action on an axis. So let's go through those one by one. Now, metal fist is a splitting, cleaving action like an axe. That one's the most easy to understand in a sense of like, it's just everyone or most people know that you just swing an axe over your head and chop downward to clack a piece of wood in half.
Right.
That
So
has
it's
a pretty
it's from
straightforward action.
it's from up to down. And
Then
and
it's not static, like he said. It becomes an energy movement that if you hit someone at any point on the path, it doesn't have to be that final chop. It's like anywhere along the way. And that's what I found with Metal Fist was like, if I did you don't run at someone in Metal Fist and hit. Like you put one out and when they block it, you pull down and then do a second one. That works a
yeah.
lot better. That first one's just sort of chopping your way in. But once you've hacked your way forward, now that second and third chop are the ones that land. So the second one, water fist, is a drilling, boring action, and he uses the idea of a waterfall. And I've heard people say like water spout on the ocean where it's spinning and drilling up, and or like or a whirlpool going in. But this one's a little more mysterious. The drilling action. Why is water drilling? Like I
Well,
don't know.
so think
To me, it
about
doesn't
think about
click
what
that
happens
well.
in a waterfall, right? You got this big downward flow, right? And when it hits the bottom, what does it do? It spirals, kind of creates that little whirlpool spirally thing, whoosh, whoosh, and it gets, and then,
That could be.
I mean, that's one way to look at it. I mean, I've always been taught it's more of a wave, right? That as one part of the wave is crashing, another one is coming up behind it.
For the
Um,
continuousness of ocean waves, or one comes in as one going out.
yeah, and then the forward motion of the whole thing, right? That as you're moving forward, 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 that's the tidal wave aspect of it. And then the twisting and coiling of your forearms and your legs and your body is the whirlpool aspect of it.
hmm And maybe also how water flows around things in a spiraling way. Water hits a rock, it doesn't just,
Sure.
some of it might go over the top, but a lot of it will swirl around one side or the other and turn in on itself in a sort of a spiraling fashion.
Mhm.
Might be another way to
That's
visualize it.
that's the again, so what I described were the characteristics of the movement. What you described was more the quality of water, right?
Of
So
the
both of
element.
those things are in play, right?
hmm
Water's quality is very, like you said, it goes around things, it yields, it spirals, it does whatever it needs to
Right. It
do to
doesn't go backwards though. It goes around what it's flowing towards and keeps going. It keeps
well,
going
and it
down.
finds the path of least resistance.
Mm.
And that's really the key piece, I
And
think.
metal doesn't worry about that.
No, metal looks for the weakest angle to chop through, right? You're looking for the crack in the
You
log to
split the
hit the
wood
axe, right?
lengthwise.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you don't go against the grain when you're trying to
Mm.
use the axe, right? Um, so they each have their like, there's a way to use it effectively as opposed to, just kind of throwing it at
Throwing
the
it.
wall, like
Yeah.
you said.
And water is the opposite of metal in that it's coming from below and drilling upward. So they're
Right.
they're sort of paired together as opposites. And that one is, to me, it's a little closer range. Like you can use metal chopping to contact somebody from a distance and get, begin the conflict. But water, you've got to be a little, it's an uppercut. So you've got to be
Yeah.
a little closer. So you've got to be inside their arms a little bit and drill up either over their arm or under in order to go upward and ideally hit them in the throat or the chin or the,
Yeah,
knockout punch from below.
exactly. It's like Peachrin is the long range, outside kind of block, and then you got to get in close and do something, and that's where you one of the other techniques, which
Right. One of the other four can happen after that, pretty much.
yeah, and water is a very effective one because if you think about what P-Train is doing is it's pulling something down, so the person's head's going to be going down. Well, if the count, if the follow up of that after you pull them down is something coming up, their head's going to be going down as your fist is coming up. So you get, in a sense, twice the amount of force, right?
Right. That's
Where
always
if their
nice.
head is going back as you hit them, you get half as much force.
Right. That's one of those internal martial arts strategies of making yourself stronger by making the other person weaker in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
They're adding their force to your force on the impact, and that's a way to become stronger. So the third one here is wood fist, which is the middle of the five elements. It's forward and back. So he describes it as crushing, smashing action like a battering ram. So it's instead of going up or down or whatever, this one goes straight forward
Right.
with a
This is the
crushing
body
and
shot.
smashing. Right. So you drilled him into the chin and then instantly follow with a body shot.
Mm-hmm.
And that one makes sense. I think the way it's been described to me is wood is always growing outward and forward and kind of slowly creeping inextricably, unstoppably, maybe imperceptibly, but the wood just keeps growing outward. And like all living things, it grows upward towards the sun. And so that's that battering ram effect rather than the fluidity of water or whatever. Wood is much more stable and strong and just keeps on going.
Think about hitting a balloon with a arrow, right? That what happens at first is it hits it and it goes into the balloon quite a ways before it actually penetrates through the rubber, right?
Hmm.
And that's what bone training does is it crushes the front of the body into the back of the body so that the impact is really hitting the spine or an internal organ or your
Hmm.
throat is being crushed. So it's not this impact on the surface, it's getting that thing to go in and then explode once it's taken all the slack out.
And that half step bung tren is a famous Xingyi technique where as you're impacting, you take an additional half a step forward to really sink it in. Like you're saying, once you penetrated the surface, you move your body forward another couple inches to just
Well, it's not just
crush
one.
and
It's
smash.
yeah. Once that balloon pops, you down.
Then you can
That's
unload.
yeah. That's your hole in the mosquito net, and you just let loose. But yeah,
So then we move on to the fire fist. So the next two fists are also opposites in a way. Fire fist has this sort of outward twisting action, and earth fist has sort of this inward twisting action. So fire fist is pounding, bursting action, like a ball shot out of a cannon. Different than wood fist in that growing forward effect, but they always use the cannonball as the metaphor for fire fist of shooting out with a sudden explosive action.
well, I mean, again, just think of instead of an arrow hitting a balloon, what happens when you shoot it with a bullet? Right? The surface pops first, then it
Hmm.
goes through it, right? So where with
Faster somehow, whipping
you're
harder.
pushing to you hit resistance and then releasing. With fire, you're hitting the surface and then shooting it through like a bullet, right? So it again, it has a very similar quality to it, but it's more explosive in a sense rather than expansive.
And it's also done with that zigzagging footwork as
Yes.
opposed to wood fist, which is straightforward. So that fire fist has this sort of, tumbling effect of a cannonball or a bullet that it's going forward, but it's also spinning at the same time. So it's got that extra sort of weird effect, kinetic effect that's different than a straight shot of an arrow. So that brings us to the final technique, the mysterious earth fist, Hong Chen, crossing fist with a swirling corkscrew-like action on an axis. So earth fist is sort of this, how would you describe? You're going from,
It's got a little bit of everything.
you're twisting inward and out. Yes, it's got a little bit of everything, like earth must. So it's crossing fist is how it's called because you're using a zigzag shape, but you're also crossing your body and then going back out again with the earth fist. One comes in as the other one goes out again, like a lot of these. And it's done on a horizontal plane, kind of at mid-body level. So it's done as a body shot. But you could lift it up and use it as a high block or as a low block while the other one comes around. And so it's not, you could hit someone in the side with it basically, or in the kidneys or something as a side kidney shot would be the picture perfect version of it. But it's also more likely to be used on the inward with a hammer fist. But like the other hand, meanwhile, is coming in with an inward hammer fist. And that's just every bit as important as the outward twisting one, is the inward pulling one. That can just be a brutal body shot or even head shot at close range.
I mean, I don't know how many people will get this, but it's the closest to the single palm change. So Bagua single palm change movement. Hung Trin is the closest thing in Xingyi that you have to that type of action where you're taking something with one hand and then crossing over and using the other one to hit. So it's a sort of a sweeping crossing motion, right? It's going from side to side, but it's also going up and down, and it's also going in and out, right? So, like I said, and it's got a little bit of everything, right?
And he has a note here that speaks more on that earth thing. To ground and to root are closely related concepts that connect the feet to the earth as the source of power. Xingyi emphasizes grounding and rooting in its training. So that's that heavy aspect of Xingyi. That's once you make contact in Xingyi, you can often feel somebody's good. They're rooted like hell, and when they hit, you fly back because they are stuck to the ground in a way that makes the techniques way more effective. So that brings us to the end of our episode. But I wanted to update people on where we were at the Patreon story from Hung Han's book, Blurred Boundaries. So we've gotten to the point where there's a challenge match about to take place in Master Hung Xiang's school gymnasium. The author, Hong Han versus Mr. K. Okay, Miss.
Um,
Okay, Hong replied, accepting the challenge. Mr. K clearly knew that these restrictions would place no formal constraints on him, especially since there were no other people to witness the situation. Moreover, since this foreign martial artist had cut off the master-disciple relationship with the training hall, any unexpected mishap could occur. But in that situation, it seemed Hong Han had no other choice except to face this challenge with all his strength. So if you want to hear the rest of the challenge match story, click on the Patreon because it's about to go down.
Hey, folks, hope you enjoyed the episode. You can go over to the Patreon to hear the continuation. It's $5 a month for the regular membership and $10 a month for the premium membership, where you get the entire archive of everything we have on there. So don't forget to check out the Instagram and the Facebook page as well. All right, thanks for listening. Take care of yourselves and be well.